Good afternoon, everyone. Um, uh, Over the last 3 days, we've been talking a lot about leadership. We've talked about visionary leadership, we've talked about ethical leadership, we've talked about effective leadership, and we've, in all of these conversations, put you as the next generation of security sector leaders right in the middle of things. Because these issues that we discussed over the first module are not necessarily as abstract as they might sound, but they relate to what you could all do as change agents in your respective countries. So, after having talked a lot about leadership, let's now talk about how we transition that discussion within the context of Africa's evolving security challenges. My role here this afternoon is pretty simple. I'm going to be summarizing and also looking forward a little bit to say, what does all of this mean for you as a leader in your country? So I'll talk a little bit about evolving trends. Both Jennifer and Adrian have already mentioned a lot of these issues, so I'll just illustrate these very quickly. And then I will just highlight what I see as one of the key drivers of insecurity. Doreen asked me to speak a little bit about the regional implications. What does this mean, not just at a national level, but regional level? And then I would end with my crystal ball slide, which is, if we were to look forward and say, what does this mean for you as a security professional in your country? I would say there is an important role for you as critical thinkers, because you're not just soldiers or policemen or government functionaries. I think we've all agreed over the past 2 or 3 days that you are critical thinkers. So what does critical thinking have to do with security and addressing security threats? Thinking about the evolution of security in Africa, the media's view of Africa has evolved. These are 3 actual front pages of The Economist magazine from 2000, 2011, and 2013. We see the language used to describe Africa has evolved. What happened between 2000 and 2013? We also see that definitions of security have evolved. If you go back to the OAU Charter, as most African countries gained their independence, we've seen an evolution of how security is described through today, when we are talking a lot more about security for all African citizens, citizen-centric security. And the political economy as well has evolved. The relationship between the state and the citizens. And at the core of this relationship is what is legitimacy. Both Adrian and Jennifer have mentioned this. But I think it's interesting to look at how over time this legitimacy or lack thereof has manifested itself. I think immediately after independence, for most African countries, it was contested legitimacy. Both speakers talked about how elite groups were favored over the majority. And so once the colonial folk left, there was this contestation. If democracy is about numbers and votes, why do you, the few, have the right to lord it over the rest of us? So there were contestations, and a lot of the immediate post-independence violence, both political and ethnic, had to do with these contestations. Then we had what I call the conferred legitimacy phase, when, particularly during the Cold War era, you had countries and leaders being rewarded not for providing for their citizens, but because of their ideological leanings. So legitimacy was conferred. And in my book, this is what sowed the seeds of a lot of the impunity we see in politics today. It became institutionalized during the period of conferred legitimacy. Then you had performance legitimacy. A number of countries grew up and said, well, we need to do something. We need to perform because elections and democracy are what the international community recognize. So if I build a bridge from nowhere to nowhere, I have performed. Or if I build a clinic, I have performed. Forgetting about the importance of the provision of security and services, it became a focus on performance legitimacy. And now Adrian laid this out pretty well, the non-state actors, etc., urbanization, migration, we're now seeing fragmented legitimacy. And I'll highlight this a little bit. But both Jennifer and Adrian talked about the social contract. This schematic kind of lays it out because it's a bargain between those who govern and those who are being governed. And quite often, the governing classes fail to live up to their part of the bargain, partly because of these institutionalized weaknesses in governance in most African countries, but also partly because of external influences. And this is where the bottom circle of natural resources and foreign aid help, in a lot of cases, make things worse. And so the challenge for us is, how do we break the vicious cycle and replace it with a virtuous cycle that is focused a lot more on reconstituting the top cycle, where the governments provide the services and the security, and the people also reciprocate, as the previous speakers have mentioned. There are many drivers of insecurity. I'll just put the slide up here, but it's very important to recognize that there's a lot of there are a lot of factors, but the more important than listing out the number of factors is knowing how all of these factors are interconnected, which means you really don't have the luxury of choosing which factor you want to focus on. You need a strategy that addresses a lot of factors because they're intertwined and interconnected. So, what are some of the, why do we need to think about it from a regional or regionalized perspective? I think first because conflict in Africa today, if I were to ask you to just close your eyes and think in your mind about a map of Africa, and on that map, locate a number of the major conflicts we know of, whether it's in Central Africa, West Africa, the Sahel, Horn of Africa, just locate those conflicts. One thing that's common to all of them is that no conflict fits neatly within any national boundaries. They're all transnational. And so the approach has not only to be comprehensive, but transnational. That's a challenge because a lot of us in the room, those in uniform, we're trained to defend a constitution, a national constitution. Those in government are sworn nationally. But the problem is transnational. How do you, as Africa's emerging security sector security sector leaders, how do you solve this wicked problem? It's a lot more complex than saying we would work with our neighbors. It's everything from interoperability to harmonizing codes to ensuring that training and equipping is also regionalized. It's a complex issue. Second thing why it's important from a regional perspective is even if the conflict hasn't crossed over the border into your country, there's something that they call the bad neighborhood effect. As long as you're in the area, the amount of investment you receive would go down. The tourists can't tell the difference between one country and the neighbor. They will stop coming. And I can go on and on and on. So there's a regional imperative. We've talked about transnational crime and organized crime, but also refugee flows, migration. You think about migration, you watch CNN, you'll think migration is all about poor Africans crossing the Mediterranean to go to Europe. But if you look at the data, most of the migration in Africa is within the continent. Most of it is within the continent. How do we address this? What are the security dimensions? And so, therefore, it is imperative that as we think through these problems, we also have a regional perspective. And there are a number of regional entities. We generally default to the African Union and the RECs. But I think the commercial entities also have an important role to play. International NGOs also have an important role to play. So, we come full circle. Critical thinking. What is it all about? For those of you who remember the early pages of your syllabus, this list will be familiar to you. It's very important that you start by defining the problem. The problem is not there is insecurity in Africa. Defining the problem requires some analysis. And analysis requires evidence. What does the data tell us? What does the data tell you? Third, we need to conceptualize decisions that are rational, that make sense, not just emotional responses to an immediate manifestation, but looking at the root causes and saying, how could we think through smart ideas? We've had a number of very interesting conversations here, and the important thing here is not so much to learn from us, but to learn from each other. What have other countries done that we could learn from, or what have other countries done we could incorporate in our strategies or in our approaches? Fourth, I think flexibility is important. You have to know that the road is not going to be easy and straightforward. You're going to have to overcome a number of obstacles. And last, you also have to, I think, recognize that, you may not have all the answers. That's good as well. But it leaves you open to thinking about, think less about, I need to have all the right answers, to asking, what are the right questions I should be asking today? Because as we've looked back and seen the evolution of security challenges in Africa, we don't have to be Nobel Prize winners to know in the future it's going to continue evolving. So we have to be prepared, not just from a physical security perspective, but more so from a strategic thinking, a critical thinking perspective. What can we do today that will put us in a better place to address or forestall challenges that would emerge in the outer years? Thank you.